The stars looked different from inside Nexus Prime. Captain Jake Morrison pressed his face against the thick glass window of the observation deck and watched as alien ships docked at the massive space station. Some vessels were sleek and silver, like liquid mercury flowing through space. Others looked like giant insects with metal wings that folded against their bodies. A few ships seemed to be made of pure crystal that caught the light from nearby stars and threw rainbows. Across the docking bay. Jake had been in space for 15 years, but he still felt like a child seeing his first fireworks show. Nexus Prime was humanity's first real step into the galaxy. Earth had built this station at the edge of the Andromeda sector, as a place where humans could meet other species and learn about the wider universe. The station was huge, bigger than any city on Earth, with sections for hundreds of different alien races. "Captain Morrison, you need to see this," called Lieutenant Amy Collins from across the room. Amy was the team's expert on alien life forms. She had studied every known species for the past 5 years and could tell you which ones breathed oxygen and which ones ate metal for breakfast. Right now, she was staring at a screen that showed the main arena of the station. Jake walked over to where Amy stood with the rest of the human delegation. There were only 12 humans on the entire station, making them one of the smallest groups present. Commander Rick Baker, their military advisor, was cleaning his glasses nervously. Dr. Pete Johnson, their anthropologist, sat quietly in a corner reading from a tablet. Lisa Carter, their communications officer, was adjusting the universal translator device that let them understand the dozens of languages being spoken around them. "What am I looking at?" Jake asked as he studied the screen. "The Galactic Combat Championships," Amy replied. "It happens every year. Warriors from across known space come here to fight for the title of strongest being in the galaxy." On the screen, the arena floor was covered in what looked like black sand. The walls rose up in a perfect circle, with thousands of seats filled with creatures Jake had never seen before. Some looked almost human, but with blue skin and extra arms. Others were clearly robots made of shining metal. A few appeared to be living plants that had learned to walk and talk. "Who usually wins?" Jake asked. Rick answered without looking up from his own tablet. "The same guy who's won for the past 50 years. His name is Zekthara. He's from the Vorthek Empire." Jake had heard of the Vorthek. They were a warrior race that controlled a large part of the galaxy through military might. Their soldiers were known for being nearly impossible to kill in battle. The Vorthek had never shown much interest in talking to humans, considering them too weak and primitive to bother with. "There he is," Amy said, pointing at the screen. Jake looked and felt his mouth go dry. Zekthara stood in the center of the arena, and he was the most terrifying thing Jake had ever seen. The alien warrior was 12 feet tall with 4 arms, each one as thick as a tree trunk. His skin looked like it was made of black crystal that reflected the arena lights. When he moved, parts of his body seemed to fade in and out of existence, as if he could become a ghost whenever he wanted. "He can phase through solid matter," Amy explained. "That's how he avoids most attacks. Plus, he's about 10 times stronger than any human and twice as fast." On the screen, a new challenger entered the arena. This one looked like a giant made of living rock, with arms like boulders and a head that glowed with inner fire. The crowd cheered as the two fighters faced each other. "That's a Titan from the 7th planet of the Regulus system," Amy continued. "They're nearly indestructible. Their skin is harder than diamond, and they can lift a hover car with one hand." Jake watched as the rock giant charged at Zekthara with earth-shaking steps. The Vorthek warrior simply stood still until the last second, then seemed to melt into thin air. The Titan's massive fists passed right through empty space where Zekthara had been standing. Zekthara reappeared behind the rock giant and struck with all 4 arms at once. The sound was like thunder echoing through the arena. Cracks appeared across the Titan's back, spreading like a spider web. The giant fell forward and did not get up. "Fight's over," Rick said. "Zekthara wins again." The crowd erupted in cheers, but Jake noticed something odd. Most of the noise came from the section where the Vorthek sat. The other species seemed to He clapping politely but without much enthusiasm. It was like watching a play where everyone already knew how it would end. How many times has he won? Jake asked. Every single tournament for 50 years, Amy replied. Nobody has even come close to beating him. Most fights last less than 5 minutes. Dr. Pete Johnson finally looked up from his tablet. Pete was a quiet man who spent most of his time studying human culture and history. He had gray hair and wore glasses that made him look like a professor, which he had been before joining the space program. Interesting, Pete said softly. What's interesting? Jake asked. The way he fights, it's very predictable. Rick laughed. Predictable? The guy just beat a living mountain in 30 seconds. Yes, but he always does the same thing, Pete continued. He waits, phases through the attack, then strikes from behind. Every single time, Jake looked back at the screen. Another challenger had entered the arena. This one looked like a giant insect with 6 legs and wings that buzzed so fast they were just a blur. Amy identified it as a hive warrior from the Outer Rim. The fight played out exactly as Pete had described. The insect darted around the arena at incredible speed, striking from multiple angles. Zekthara stood perfectly still, letting each attack pass through his phased body. Then, when the insect paused for just a moment, Zekthara solidified and grabbed it with all 4 arms. There was a loud crack, and the insect stopped moving. Same pattern, Pete observed. So what? Rick said. It works. Why change a winning strategy? Pete smiled slightly. Because patterns can be broken. The arena announcer, a floating jellyfish-like creature with a voice like singing crystals, declared Zekthara the winner once again. The Vorthek warrior raised all 4 arms in victory while the crowd gave their expected applause. Will anyone else challenge the champion? The announcer asked. The arena fell silent. Jake could see thousands of alien faces on the screen, all looking away from the arena floor. Nobody wanted to be the next victim. It appears we have no more challengers, the announcer continued. Once again, Zekthara of the Vorthek Empire proves that no being in the universe can match his strength, speed, and skill in combat. Jake felt a strange mixture of admiration and sadness. Zekthara was certainly impressive, but the tournament had become boring. It was like watching a movie where the hero always won without trying. Poor bastards, Rick muttered. They keep coming? Back hoping someone will finally beat him, but it never happens. Maybe it just takes the right approach, Pete said quietly. Jake looked at the mild-mannered anthropologist. What do you mean? Well, everyone keeps trying to beat him at his own game. Physical combat, using strength and speed. But what if someone tried something completely different? Amy raised an eyebrow. Like what? Pete adjusted his glasses and smiled. I have no idea, but I think it would be fascinating to find out. On the screen, Zekthara was leaving the arena floor. The crowd was already starting to disperse, heading back to their ships or to the station's many entertainment districts. Another tournament had ended the same way it always did. Jake turned away from the screen and looked out at the stars again. Somewhere out there, humanity was still learning its place in the galaxy. They were smaller and weaker than most species, but maybe that didn't have to be a disadvantage. Maybe being different could be a strength. Come on, he said to his team. Let's go get dinner. I want to try that restaurant that serves food from 12 different worlds. As they walked toward the exit, Jake didn't notice that Pete Johnson stayed behind, still watching the empty arena with a thoughtful expression on his face. The next morning brought news that spread through Nexus Prime like wildfire. 3 more challengers had stepped forward overnight to face Zekthara in special exhibition matches. Captain Jake Morrison sat in the human delegation's quarters watching the morning news feeds with his coffee growing cold in his hands. The first challenger was a cybernetic warrior from the Machine Collective, with arms that could transform into plasma cannons and legs that moved faster than the eye could follow. Zekthara defeated him in 2 minutes. By phasing through his energy blasts and crushing his central processing unit. The second was a shape-shifting blob from the amorphous worlds that could become any form it wanted. The creature tried to mimic Zekthara's own abilities, but the original was too skilled. The fight lasted 4 minutes before the blob surrendered. The third challenger was the most impressive yet. A energy being from the stellar nursery, made of pure light and capable of moving at near light speed. The crowd actually cheered when this challenger entered the arena, hoping finally someone might have a chance. The fight lasted exactly 90 seconds before the energy being flickered out like a dying star. "This is getting ridiculous," Commander Rick Baker said as he watched the replay of the energy being's defeat. "At this rate, every species in the galaxy will have tried and failed to beat this guy." Lieutenant Amy Collins was running calculations. On her tablet, "I've analyzed 50 years of tournament data. Zecatharas' longest fight was 8 minutes and 37 seconds. His shortest was 12 seconds. The average fight time is 3 minutes and 14 seconds. "Efficient," Dr. Pete Johnson said from his corner. He had been quiet all morning, reading something on his personal device. Lisa Carter was monitoring the communication channels. "The betting odds are getting crazy. Some species are offering 10,000 to 1 against anyone beating Zecthara. A few are even betting on how long the next challenger will last." Jake stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see alien ships arriving and departing constantly. Word of the special exhibition matches had drawn even more spectators to the station. What drives them to keep trying? He wondered aloud. "Pride?" Rick answered. "Every warrior species thinks they're the strongest. They can't accept that someone else might be better. Or maybe they see something we don't," Pete said quietly. Amy looked up from her tablet. "What do you mean?" "Well, what if the problem isn't that Zecthara is unbeatable? What if the problem is that everyone keeps trying to beat him the same way?" Rick laughed. "Pete, the guy has fought hundreds of different species with completely different fighting styles. Rock creatures, energy beings, shapeshifters, machines, living plants, gaseous entities, beings made of pure thought. You name it, he's beaten it. But they all had one thing in common," Pete continued. "They all tried to use physical force or special abilities to overcome him. Nobody has ever tried to challenge him to something completely different." "Like what?" Jake asked. Pete smiled. "I'm not sure yet. But I think the answer might be simpler than everyone assumes." The communication system chimed with an announcement. "Attention all beings aboard Nexus Prime. The champion Zecthara will make a special appearance in the main arena in 1 hour. All are welcome to attend." Jake looked at his team. "Anyone interested in seeing what he has to say?" An hour later, the arena was packed beyond capacity. Beams hung from the ceiling supports and crowded into the aisles. The human delegation had managed to get seats in the middle section. Giving them a good view of the arena floor, Zecthara entered through the main gate, and the crowd fell silent. The massive alien warrior walked to the center of the arena and stood perfectly still for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was amplified throughout the station by the universal translators. "I am Zecthara of the Vorthic Empire," he began. His voice sounded like metal grinding against stone. "For 50 years, I have stood as champion of these games. For 50 years, warriors from across the galaxy have come to challenge me. For 50 years, I have proven that no being in the universe possesses the strength to defeat me." The crowd listened in complete silence. Even the background hum of the station's life support system seemed to quiet down. "I have faced the strongest, the fastest, the most skilled warriors that all of known space can produce. Rock beings who could crush mountains. Energy entities who could burn through solid steel. Shapeshifters who could become any form they desired. Machines with the processing power of entire worlds. None have succeeded." Zecthara raised all 4 arms above his head. "I have come to realize that my victory is not just personal triumph. It is proof that the Vorthak are the supreme species in the galaxy. We are evolution's greatest achievement. We are what all other species aspire to become but never can." Jake felt uncomfortable. The speech was starting to sound less like a victory celebration and more like a declaration of superiority over every other race in the galaxy. "Therefore," Zecthara continued, "I issue this challenge to all beings present. If any species believes They can produce a warrior capable of defeating me. Let them step forward now. But know this, when they fail, as they surely will, they will have proven once and for all that their species is inferior to mine. The arena remained silent. Jake could see thousands of alien faces, all looking down at their feet or hands or whatever body parts they used to show embarrassment. I thought so, Zekthara said with what sounded like satisfaction. No one dares, I challenge you. The voice came from somewhere in the crowd. Jake looked around, trying to see who had spoken. The universal translators were working overtime, converting the statement into hundreds of different languages simultaneously. I challenge you to combat, the voice said again, clearer this time. Jake's heart stopped. The voice was coming from right next to him. He turned slowly and saw Dr. Pete Johnson standing up, his hands clasped behind his back, looking perfectly. Come, Pete, what are you doing? Jake hissed, but Pete was already walking down the steps toward the arena floor. The crowd parted in front of him, creating a path. Thousands of eyes followed the small human as he made his way to the center of the arena. Zekthara looked down at Pete with what might have been amusement. You are human, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Pete replied. Dr. Pete Johnson, representing Earth. The crowd began to murmur. Jake could hear fragments of conversation as aliens discussed this unexpected development. Most seemed to think Pete was either very brave or very stupid. Human, Zekthara said, your species is new to this galaxy. You're small, weak, and possess no special abilities. Why do you wish to die? Pete adjusted his glasses. I don't wish to die. I wish to challenge you to combat. Zekthara's laugh was like rocks falling down a mountain. You cannot be serious. Look at me. He flexed his 4 arms, each one larger than Pete's entire body. I am 12 feet tall. I am stronger than a dozen of your kind. I can phase through matter itself. You are a soft pink creature who would break like glass. Nevertheless, Pete said calmly, I challenge you. The arena fell completely silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. This was insane. Pete was going to get himself killed, and for what? To prove a point about human courage? Zekthara studied Pete for a long moment. Very well, human. I accept your challenge. But I warn you, I will not hold back simply because you are small and weak. When we fight, you will die quickly. Actually, Pete said, I have one condition. You dare to make conditions? Zekthara's voice rose in anger. According to tournament rules, the challenger may choose the nature of the combat as long as both parties agree to it. Jake saw several tournament officials nodding in the crowd. Pete was right about the rules. What do you propose? Zekthara, asked. Pete smiled. I propose we settle this with a contest of strategy and psychology. An ancient human game that tests not physical strength but mental agility and the ability to read one's opponent. A game? Zekthara sounded confused. Yes. A simple game, but one that requires deep thinking and understanding of human nature. Zekthara considered this. Jake could see the alien warrior's pride warring with his curiosity. Finally, pride won. Very well, Zekthara said. I accept your strange human game. But when I defeat you at your own contest, it will prove that Vorthak superiority extends beyond physical combat to mental prowess as well. Agreed, Pete said. We fight tomorrow at noon. The crowd erupted in chaos as Pete walked calmly back to his seat. Jake grabbed his arm the moment he sat down. Pete, have you lost your mind? What game are you talking about? Pete looked at him with twinkling eyes. Rock, paper, scissors. Rick stared at him. You're going to challenge the most feared warrior in the galaxy to rock, paper, scissors. It's the perfect contest, Pete said. It requires strategy, psychology, and the ability to think several moves ahead. Plus, it's something no alien has ever seen before. Amy was running medical scans with her tablet. Pete, even if you win this game, he's going to be furious. He might just kill you anyway. No, Pete said confidently. The Vorthak have a strict honor code. If he agrees to settle our dispute with a game, he has to abide by the results. It's one of the few things I admire about their culture. Jake looked. at his friend with new respect and terror. Pete, I hope you know what you're doing. Pete smiled and went back to reading his tablet. So do I? The moment the arena doors closed behind them, Captain Jake Morrison grabbed Dr. Pete Johnson by the shoulders and spun him around. Pete, what the hell were you thinking? That thing is going to kill you. Pete calmly removed Jake's hands from his shoulders and adjusted his glasses. Jake, please calm down. I know exactly what I'm doing. No, you don't. Commander Rick Baker stepped forward, his face red with anger. You just challenged the most dangerous warrior in the galaxy to a children's game. Do you have any idea what's going to happen when he realizes you're making fun of him? I'm not making fun of him, Pete replied. I'm going to beat him. Lieutenant Amy Collins was already running medical scans on Pete with her portable scanner. Pete, your heart rate is completely normal. Either you're in shock or you've genuinely lost your mind. My mind is fine, Amy. Better than fine, actually. I've been thinking about this problem for weeks. Lisa Carter looked up from her communication device. Pete, the news feeds are going crazy. Every species in the galaxy is talking about the crazy human who challenged Zekthara. Most of them think you're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. What do the odds makers say? Pete asked with mild curiosity. They're not even taking bets, Lisa replied. Nobody wants to waste money on a fight that's going to last 30 seconds. Jake sat down heavily in one of the chairs. Pete, I need you to explain this to me. Rock, paper, scissors, really? Pete walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Jake, what do you know about the Vorthek culture? They're warriors. They respect strength and despise weakness. They have a rigid honor code that governs their behavior. Exactly. And what's the most important part of that honor code? Rick answered. They always keep their word. If a Vorthek makes a promise, they'll die before breaking it. Right, and Zekthara just promised in front of thousands of witnesses that he would settle our dispute through a game of my choosing. He can't back out now without losing face in front of the entire galaxy. Amy was still staring at her scanner. Pete, that doesn't change the fact that you're going to lose. Rock, paper, scissors is a game of chance. There's no skill involved. Pete turned around and smiled. Amy, that's where you're wrong. Rock, paper, scissors isn't a game of chance at all. It's a game of psychology and pattern recognition. And I've been studying Zekthara's psychological patterns for the past 6 months. What patterns? Jake asked. The way he fights. Every single combat follows the same sequence. He assesses his opponent, identifies their primary attack method, then waits for them to commit to that method before countering. He's methodical, logical, and above all, predictable. Rick shook his head. Pete, fighting and playing games are completely different things. Are they? Both require reading your opponent, understanding their tendencies, and making strategic decisions based on incomplete information. The only difference is the stakes. Lisa looked up from her device again. Pete, I've been monitoring the alien communication channels. The Vorthek are actually angry about this. They think you're insulting their champion by suggesting he needs to prove himself in a human game. Good, Pete said. Anger makes people careless. It disrupts their normal thinking patterns. Amy closed her scanner with a frustrated sigh. Pete, even if you're right about the psychology, you're still taking a huge risk. What if you're wrong? What if he just gets lucky? That I lose and humanity looks foolish for a while. But if I win... Pete paused and looked at each of his teammates. If I win, we prove that humans belong in this galaxy. We show that intelligence and creativity can triumph over brute force. Jake stood up and began pacing. Okay, let's assume for a moment that you're right about all this. How exactly? Do you plan to beat him? Pete sat down at the table and pulled out his tablet. I've been analyzing video footage of every fight Zekthara has had for the past 10 years. I've identified 17 distinct behavioral patterns that repeat consistently. Such as? Rick asked. He always opens with a defensive posture. He prefers to let his opponent make the first move. When he's confident, he tends to use his lower arms first. When he's uncertain, he phases out of reality for exactly 2.3 seconds before reappearing. When he's angry, he attacks with all four arms simultaneously. Amy leaned forward. How does any of that help you in rock, paper, scissors? Because psychological patterns don't change just because the situation changes. If Zekthera is methodical and defensive in combat, he'll be methodical and defensive in the game. If he prefers direct confrontation when he's confident, he'll choose rock. If he's trying to be clever, he'll choose scissors. If he's being cautious, he'll choose paper. Lisa was typing rapidly on her device. Pete, I need to understand the rules of this game so I can explain it to the universal translators. How exactly does rock, paper, scissors work? Pete smiled. It's beautifully simple. Two players simultaneously choose one of three options: rock, paper, or scissors. Rock crushes scissors, scissors cuts paper, and paper covers rock. Best of 7 rounds wins. That's it? Rick asked. That's your master plan? The game itself is simple. The strategy is complex. Each player has to predict what their opponent will choose while simultaneously trying to be unpredictable themselves. It's a perfect test of psychological warfare. Jake stopped pacing and looked at Pete seriously. What if you're wrong about his honor code? What if he decides to just kill you after the game? He won't. The Vorthak don't just respect strength, they respect cunning. If I beat him fairly, according to rules he agreed to, he'll have to acknowledge that I outhought him. That's something they can respect. Amy was running simulations on her tablet. Pete, I've calculated the odds. Even if you're right about his patterns, there's still a random element. You could lose just through bad luck. True, but I'm not relying on luck. I'm relying on the fact that Zekthera has never faced an opponent who studied him this carefully. He's used to fighting warriors who challenge him directly. He's never dealt with someone who's trying to get inside his head. Lisa looked up from her typing. Pete, there's something else you should know. The tournament officials are debating whether to allow this contest. Some of them think it's a mockery of the games. What's the current decision? They're going to allow it, but only because the champion agreed to it. They're treating it as a legitimate test of mental combat. Rick sat down across from Pete. Okay, let's say you win. Then what? You become the new Galactic champion? You ready to fight every warrior in the galaxy? Pete laughed. Rick, I'm not trying to become a warrior. I'm trying to prove a point. Humans don't need to be the strongest or the fastest to make a difference in this galaxy. We just need to be smart enough to think outside the box. Amy closed her tablet. Pete, I've done everything I can to prepare medical support for tomorrow. But I have to ask, are you absolutely sure about this? Pete stood up and walked back to the window. Outside, alien ships continued to arrive as word spread about the unusual contest. Amy, do you know what the most dangerous assumption is? What? Assuming that the way things have always been done is the only way they can be done. For 50 years, every species has tried to beat Zekthara through force. Every single one has failed. Maybe it's time to try something different. Jake joined Pete at the window. You know, when I was a kid, I had a teacher who always said that the best way to solve an impossible problem was to change the rules of the game. Smart teacher, Pete replied. Yeah, she was. She also said that changing the rules only works if you're smarter than everyone else thinks you are. Pete smiled. I guess we'll find out tomorrow. Lisa finished her preparations and looked up at the group. Pete, I've prepared the translation protocols. The universal translators will be able to explain the game rules to everyone in the arena. Are you ready for this? Pete took one last look at the stars and turned back to his friends. I've been ready for this my whole life. Every species in the galaxy thinks humans are weak because we're not the biggest or the strongest. Tomorrow, we show them that being different doesn't mean being inferior. Rick stood up and extended his hand. Well, for what it's worth, I think you're completely insane. But I also think you might just be crazy enough to pull this off. Pete shook his hand. Thanks, Rick. That means a lot. Amy packed up her medical equipment. Pete, promise me one thing. What's that? Win. Pete adjusted his glasses one final time. I'll do my best. As the human delegation prepared for what might be the most important day in their species' history, none of them noticed the small crowd of aliens that had gathered outside their quarters. Word was spreading through the station that the human might actually have a plan. For the first time in 50 years, beings from across the galaxy were beginning to hope that maybe, just maybe, someone might finally find a way to defeat the unbeatable champion. The arena had never been so full. Beings packed every seat, hung from support beams, and crowded into spaces that weren't meant for spectators. Captain Jake Morrison estimated there were at least 50,000 aliens present, representing hundreds of species from across the galaxy. Ship captains had delayed their departures, just to witness what many were calling the most unusual contest in galactic history. Dr. Pete Johnson walked onto the arena floor at exactly noon, wearing his simple gray uniform and carrying nothing but his tablet. The crowd fell silent as he made his way to the center of the black sand arena. He looked smaller than ever surrounded by the massive circular walls, but his steps were steady and his expression calm. Zekthara entered from the opposite gate, and the difference between the two contestants was almost comical. The Vorthek champion stood 12 feet tall, his crystalline black skin reflecting the arena lights like a living mirror. His 4 massive arms moved with fluid grace as he walked, and when he activated his phasing ability, parts of his body flickered in and out of existence like a ghost made of dark crystal. The tournament announcer, the jellyfish-like creature with the singing voice, floated above the arena floor. Citizens of the galaxy, today we witness something unprecedented. For the first time in 50 years, our champion Zekthara will face a challenge that does not involve traditional combat. The crowd murmured in dozens of languages. Jake could hear fragments of conversation as the universal translators worked overtime to keep up with the chatter. The human challenger, Dr. Pete Johnson of Earth, has proposed to settle their dispute through what he calls an ancient human game of strategy and psychology. Zekthara looked down at Pete with what might have been amusement. Human, are you certain you wish to proceed with this foolishness? I offer you one final chance to withdraw your challenge and save yourself the embarrassment of defeat. Pete adjusted his glasses and smiled. Thank you for the offer, but I'm quite confident in my choice. Very well. Explain your human game to me. Pete stepped forward so his voice would carry clearly through the arena's sound system. The game is called Rock, Paper, Scissors. It is indeed ancient, played by human children and adults for thousands of years as a way to make decisions and settle disputes. The crowd leaned forward. In the human delegations section, Lieutenant Amy Collins was recording everything for Earth's historical archives. Commander Rick Baker sat on the edge of his seat, his hands clenched into fists. Lisa Carter monitored the communication channels as news of the contest spread to every corner of the galaxy. The rules are simple, Pete continued. 2 players face each other and simultaneously choose one of 3 options. Rock, represented by a closed fist. Paper, represented by an open hand. Scissors, represented by 2 fingers extended. Pete demonstrated each gesture clearly. The arena's cameras zoomed in on his hands, projecting the images onto massive screens so everyone could see. Rock crushes scissors and wins. Scissors cuts paper and wins. Paper covers rock and wins. If both players choose the same option, the round is a tie and we play again. Zekthara's 4 arms moved as he practiced the gestures. His massive hands looked awkward making the simple human signs, but he quickly adapted. This seems overly simplistic for a contest of strategy. The strategy lies not in the gestures themselves, but in predicting what your opponent will choose while remaining unpredictable yourself. Each player must think about what the other player thinks they will think. Several aliens in the crowd were already trying the gestures themselves, fascinated by the simplicity of the concept. How many rounds? Zekthara asked. Best of 7. First player to win 4 rounds is the victor. The tournament officials huddled together in animated discussion. Jake could see them gesturing and arguing about whether this constituted a legitimate contest. Finally, the head official, a tall being made of what looked like living metal, stepped forward. The challenge has been accepted according to tournament rules. The contest is declared valid. The crowd erupted in cheers, boos, and sounds that Jake couldn't even identify. Some species were clearly excited by the novelty of the situation. Others seemed offended that their traditional combat tournament was being turned into what they saw as a children's game. "Citizens of the galaxy," the announcer called, "prepare to witness the first rock, paper, scissors contest in galactic history." Pete and Zekthara faced each other in the center of the arena. The massive alien towered over the small human, but Pete showed no sign of fear or intimidation. "Before we begin," Pete said, "I want to make sure you understand the psychological aspect of this game. It's not about random chance. It's about reading your opponent, understanding their patterns, and thinking several moves ahead." Zekthara's laugh was like grinding metal. "Human, I have studied warfare and strategy for over 2 centuries. I understand psychology better than... You understand your own species?" "We'll see," Pete replied calmly. The announcer floated higher above the arena. "Contestants, prepare for round 1. You will count to 3 together, then reveal your choices simultaneously." Pete and Zekthara raised their hands. The arena fell completely silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. "1," they said together. Jake noticed that Pete was watching Zekthara's eyes, not his hands. The alien champion's 4 arms were positioned identically, giving no hint of which he would use or what gesture he would make. 2. The tension in the arena was incredible. 50,000 beings held their breath as they watched 2 contestants prepare to play a simple human game for the unofficial championship of the galaxy. 3. Both players revealed their choices simultaneously. Pete had chosen paper. Zekthara had chosen rock with his lower right hand. "Paper covers rock," the announcer declared. "Round 1 goes to the human," the crowd exploded. Half the arena cheered while the other half sat in stunned silence. Jake jumped to his feet, pumping his fist in the air. Amy was frantically taking notes while Rick stared in disbelief. Zekthara looked down at his hand, then at Pete's, as if he couldn't quite believe what had happened. "Impossible. How did you know I would choose rock?" Pete smiled. "You're a warrior. When in doubt, you prefer the direct approach. Rock is the most aggressive choice, the one that represents strength and confrontation. It was the logical first move for someone with your mindset." "Beginner's luck," Zekthara growled. "Maybe. Let's find out." They prepared for round 2. This time, Zekthara studied Pete more carefully, all 4 of his eyes focusing on the human's face and hands. Pete remained perfectly calm, his expression giving nothing away. 1, 2, 3. Pete chose scissors. Zekthara chose paper. "Scissors cuts paper. Round 2 to the human." The noise from the crowd was deafening. Aliens were jumping up and down. Tentacles were waving, and sounds of celebration echoed from a dozen different species. In the Vorthic section, the silence was complete. Zekthara's crystalline skin began to shift color, taking on a reddish hue that Pete recognized as a sign of anger or frustration. "This is not possible. You cannot predict my choices." "I'm not predicting them," Pete explained. "I'm understanding them. You chose paper because you were trying to counter what you thought I would think you would choose. You figured I would expect rock again, so you chose the option that beats rock. But I was thinking 1 level deeper. This is madness. This is psychology," round 3 began. Zekthara was clearly agitated now, his phasing ability flickering involuntarily as his emotional control wavered. His 4 arms moved independently, as he tried to decide which hand to use and what gesture to make. 1, 2, 3. Pete chose rock. Zekthara chose scissors with 2 different hands, then quickly tried to change to paper, then back to scissors. "Contestant Zekthara has made an illegal move," the announcer declared. "Round 3 goes to the human by default." The arena erupted in chaos. Beings were shouting in languages Jake had never heard before. The Vortex section was in complete uproar, with several warriors standing and gesturing angrily at the arena floor. Pete now led 3 rounds to 0. He needed just 1 more victory to win the contest. Zekthara's skin had turned completely red, and his phasing was so erratic that he looked like a flickering hologram. This is impossible. I am the greatest warrior in the galaxy. I cannot be defeated by a soft pink creature playing a children's game. The game isn't for children, Pete said quietly. It's for anyone smart enough to understand that strength isn't just about muscles and weapons. The fourth round began. Zekthara forced himself to stand perfectly still, his phasing ability under control. All four of his arms moved in perfect synchronization as he prepared to make his choice. Jake leaned forward in his seat. One more victory and Pete would accomplish the impossible. He would defeat the unbeatable champion through nothing more than understanding psychology and thinking creatively. This is it, Amy whispered. 1, 2, 3. Both contestants revealed their choices. The arena held its breath as the announcer prepared to declare the winner of the most unusual contest in galactic history. Pete had chosen paper. Zekthara had chosen rock again. Paper covers rock. The human wins the contest. The arena exploded into the loudest noise Captain Jake Morrison had ever heard. 50,000 beings from hundreds of worlds erupted simultaneously, in cheers, roars, screams, and sounds that had no names in any human language. The sound was so loud that the arena's protective barriers activated to prevent structural damage, but then something unexpected happened. Zekthara raised all four of his massive arms into the air. "Stop!" he bellowed, his voice somehow cutting through the incredible noise. "I demand a rematch." The crowd gradually quieted, confusion replacing celebration. The tournament announcer floated uncertainly above the arena floor. "The contest was best of 7 rounds, Zekthara continued. "The human has won 4 rounds, but I have not yet lost 4. According to the rules as stated, we should continue until one of us has definitively lost." Dr. Pete Johnson looked up at the massive alien warrior with interest. "You're absolutely right. I apologize for the confusion. The contest was indeed best of 7, not first to 4. We should continue." Jake felt his heart sink. Pete had been so close to victory, and now he was giving Zekthara another chance. The Vorthek champion's confidence seemed to be returning as he realized the contest wasn't over. "Round 5, Pete said calmly. "Current score is human 4, Zekthara. 0. This time, Zekthara took much longer to prepare. He walked in a small circle, his 4 arms moving independently as he practiced different gestures. His crystalline skin had returned to its normal black color, and his phasing ability was once again under perfect control. "I have been thinking about your strategy, human," Zekthara said as they faced each other. "You claim to be reading my psychological patterns, but I believe you have simply been lucky. Luck, however, does not last forever." "You're probably right about luck," Pete replied. "Good thing I'm not relying on it." They raised their hands for round 5. The arena was completely silent now, every being focused on the 2 contestants. Jake noticed that aliens throughout the crowd were practicing the hand gestures themselves, some even playing quick games with their neighbors. 1, 2, 3. Pete chose scissors, Zekthara chose rock. Rock crushes scissors. Round 5 goes to Zekthara. The Vorthek section of the arena erupted in celebration while the rest of the crowd groaned in disappointment. Zekthara's confidence visibly increased as he scored his first victory. "You see, human? Your psychological analysis means nothing when faced with true strategic thinking. I chose rock because I knew you would expect me to avoid it after using it twice before." Pete nodded thoughtfully. "That's actually quite good reasoning. You're adapting faster than I expected. I am a warrior with 2 centuries of experience. Did you think I would not learn from my mistakes?" They prepared for round 6. Pete was still ahead 4 wins to 1, but Jake could see that the momentum was shifting. Zekthara was no longer playing randomly. He was starting to think strategically about the game itself. "Round 6, the announcer called. "If the human wins, he claims victory. If Zekthara wins, we continue to round 7. Both contestants took their positions. This time, Pete was the one who seemed to be thinking more carefully. He studied Zekthara's stance, the positioning of his 4 arms, the slight changes in his crystalline skin color. "You know, Zekthara, you're right about something," Pete said as they prepared. This game does require strategic thinking, but there's more to it than just predicting patterns. What do you mean? The best players don't just think about what their opponent will choose. They think about what their opponent thinks they will choose, and then they think about what their opponent thinks they think their opponent will choose. Zekthara's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. That sounds unnecessarily complicated, does it? You chose rock in round 5 because you thought I would expect you to avoid rock. That's exactly the kind of multi-level thinking I'm talking about. 1, 2, 3, Pete chose rock. Zekthara chose scissors. Rock crushes scissors. Round 6. Goes to the human. Pete had won the contest, 4 rounds to 2. But this time, instead of celebrating, the crowd seemed more interested in understanding what had just happened. How? Zekthara asked, his voice filled with genuine confusion. I was certain you would choose paper to counter my expected rock choice. You were thinking 2 levels deep, Pete explained. You figured I would expect rock, so you chose scissors to beat the paper you thought I would choose to beat your rock. But I was thinking 3 levels deep. I knew you were smart enough to think 2 levels, so I went back to rock. Zekthara stared at Pete for a long moment. This game is far more complex than it appears. Most good games are... But Zekthara wasn't finished. Human, I request that we continue playing even though you have technically won the contest. Why? Because I want to understand this game completely. I want to see how deep these levels of thinking can go. Pete looked surprised but pleased. You want to keep playing for the sake of learning? Yes. Is that acceptable? The crowd murmured in fascination. This was completely unprecedented. A Vorthic warrior asking to continue a contest after losing. Not for honor or revenge, but for knowledge, Pete smiled. I'd be delighted to continue. They played round 7. This time, both contestants took much longer to think. Jake could see them studying each other, each trying to determine how many levels deep the other was thinking. 1, 2, 3. Both chose paper. A tie. Again, Zekthara said immediately. 1, 2, 3. Both chose rock. Another tie. Fascinating. Pete said, we're both thinking at the same level now. Yes, but which level is it? They played again. Pete chose scissors. Zekthara chose paper. Scissors cuts paper. But wait, Pete said. Let me ask you something. What level were you thinking on that round? I was thinking that I would think you would choose rock, so you would choose paper to beat my scissors choice that I would make to beat your rock. So I chose paper to beat your paper. Pete laughed. And I was thinking that you would think that I would think that you would think that I would choose rock. So I went with scissors. How many levels is that? I honestly lost count. Zekthara made a sound that might have been laughter. This is the most mentally challenging contest I have ever experienced. They continued playing, sometimes winning, sometimes losing, sometimes tying. The crowd watched in fascination as the 2 contestants explored the deeper strategies of the simple game. Aliens throughout the arena were now playing their own games, trying to understand the psychological complexities they were witnessing. Lieutenant, Amy Collins was frantically taking notes. Jake, this is incredible. Pete isn't just beating Zekthara. At a game, he's teaching him about human thinking? Commander Rick Baker nodded. And Zekthara is actually learning. Look at him. He's not angry anymore. He's curious. Jake watched as Pete and Zekthara continued their extended match. They had moved beyond the original contest into something more like a masterclass in strategy and psychology. The Vorthic champion was asking questions about human culture, about how children learned the game, about variations and advanced strategies. You know what's really happening here? Jake said to his team. What? Amy asked. Pete isn't just proving that humans can beat aliens at games. He's proven that we can teach them things they never knew they wanted to learn. Lisa Carter looked up from her communication device. Jake, you need to hear this. The betting odds have completely changed. They're not taking bets on who wins anymore. They're taking bets on how long the 2 of them will keep playing. On the Arena floor, Pete and Zekthara had moved closer together, their conversation becoming more animated as they discussed the finer points of game theory and psychological warfare. The massive alien warrior was gesturing with all four arms as he explained Vorthic military strategy, while Pete countered with examples of human diplomatic tactics. "I think," Jake said slowly, "that Pete has accomplished something much more important than winning a contest." "What's that?" Rick asked. "He's made a friend." The crowd seemed to sense this too. The atmosphere in the arena had shifted from the bloodthirsty excitement of a combat tournament to the warm appreciation of watching two minds discover common ground. Beings from dozens of species were now playing rock, paper, scissors with their neighbors, creating a festival atmosphere that no one had expected. And in the center of it all, a small human professor and a massive alien warrior continued their game, each round teaching them more about each other's species than years of formal diplomacy had achieved. 3 hours had passed since the official contest ended, but Dr. Pete Johnson and Zekthara were still playing rock, paper, scissors in the center of the arena. What had started as a formal challenge had become something completely different. The crowd had thinned somewhat, but thousands of beings remained, watching the most unusual friendship develop in galactic history. Captain Jake Morrison checked his watch again. "Should we interrupt them? We're supposed to file a report with Earth Command in 6 hours? Are you kidding?" Lieutenant Amy Collins replied. "This is the most important diplomatic breakthrough in human history. Let them play until they're tired." "Commander." Rick Baker was watching the alien crowd with professional interest. "Jake, look around. Half these species have never spoken to each other before, and now they're all playing the same game. Pete hasn't just beaten the champion. He started a cultural revolution." On the arena floor, Pete was explaining the concept of tournaments to Zekthara. "On Earth, we have rock, paper, scissors competitions with hundreds of players. The strategy gets incredibly complex when you're facing multiple opponents who all know your playing style." Zekthara's four arms moved in what Pete had learned was the Vorthic equivalent of nodding. "This would be excellent training for military officers. The psychological skills required are identical to battlefield tactics." "That's exactly right. In fact, some human military academies use games like this to teach strategic thinking." "Remarkable." Zekthara paused in their game and looked around the arena. "Pete Johnson of Earth, I must ask you something." "What's that?" "When you challenged me yesterday, did you truly believe you could defeat me?" Pete adjusted his glasses and considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I wasn't sure. I knew the game favored intelligence over strength, and I had studied your patterns carefully. But there was always a chance you would adapt faster than I expected. Yet you challenged me anyway, knowing you might fail. Yes, why?" Pete looked up at the massive alien warrior who had become his friend. "Because sometimes the most important victories don't come from winning. They come from trying something that nobody else has thought of." Zekthara was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer somehow. "Pete Johnson of Earth, I have something to tell you." "I'm listening." "For 50 years, I have been the champion of these games. For 50 years, warriors have come to challenge me, and I have defeated them all. Do you know what that has taught?" "Me? What?" "That being unbeatable is the loneliest thing in the galaxy." The words hung in the air between them. Around the arena, the crowd had gradually grown quiet as they sensed the importance of the conversation. "When no one can defeat you," Zekthara continued, "no one wants to be your friend. They fear you, or they hate you, or they worship you from a distance. But nobody just talks to you like you're a regular person." Pete nodded slowly. "I can understand that. Today, for the first time in 50 years, someone has treated me like an equal. Not as a champion to be feared or a prize to be won, but as someone worth having a conversation with." "You are worth having a conversation with." Zekthara made that grinding sound that Pete had learned was laughter. "My people, the Vorthak, we value strength above all else. We respect those who can defeat us in battle. But you have shown me something new." "What's that?" "You have shown me that there are different kinds of strength. The strength to think creatively. The strength to approach problems differently. The strength to make friends with your enemies? Pete smiled. Those are some of humanity's best qualities. Yes, and I think they are qualities the galaxy needs more of. The tournament announcer, who had been watching the extended conversation with growing fascination, finally spoke up. Citizens of the galaxy, it appears that our contest has evolved into something unprecedented. Champion Zekthara, do you have any official statements to make? Zekthara stood to his full 12-foot height and addressed the crowd. People of all worlds, I have an announcement. From this day forward, I am no longer the champion of these games. The arena erupted in shocked murmurs. I do not retire because I have been defeated, though I have been defeated fairly and honorably. I retire because I have learned that there are more important things than being the strongest warrior in the galaxy. He gestured toward Pete. This human has taught me that true strength comes not from crushing your opponents, but from understanding them. Not from fighting alone, but from building friendships. Not from proving superiority, but from sharing knowledge. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Therefore, I propose that these games be changed. Instead of a contest, to find the strongest warrior, let them become a celebration of different kinds of strength. Let species compete not just in combat, but in games of strategy, creativity, cooperation, and understanding. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Aliens throughout the arena began cheering, speaking rapidly in their own languages, and gesturing excitedly to their neighbors. Lisa Carter was frantically taking notes as her communication device lit up with messages from across the galaxy. Furthermore, Zekthara continued, I would like to invite Dr. Pete Johnson of Earth to become the first Director of Cultural Exchange for the Galactic Games. His job will be to teach other species about the games and customs of different worlds. Pete looked stunned. That's very generous, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for such an important position. You are the most qualified being in the galaxy, Zekthara replied. You have just proven that understanding and creativity can accomplish what brute force cannot. Jake stood up in the crowd. Pete, take the job. This is what humanity has been hoping for since we first reached the stars. Amy was already calculating the implications. Pete, do you realize what this means? You wouldn't just be representing Earth, you'd be helping dozens of species understand each other better. Rick was grinning from ear to ear. Plus, you'd get to travel the galaxy teaching aliens how to play human games? How cool is that? Pete looked around the arena at thousands of alien faces, all watching him expectantly. Some were still practicing rock, paper, scissors gestures. Others were discussing the game with members of different species. The atmosphere was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Zekthara, Pete said finally, I accept your offer. But I have one condition. Name it. I want you to be my co-director. This can't be just about human games and human thinking. It needs to be about all of our different approaches to problem solving. Zekthara's crystalline skin shifted to a warm golden color that Pete had learned indicated pleasure and agreement. Pete Johnson of Earth, you continue to surprise me. Yes, I accept. The crowd exploded in celebration. The sound was even louder than when Pete had first won the contest. But this time it was pure joy rather than competitive excitement. The tournament announcer called for order. Citizens of the galaxy, we have witnessed history today. Not just the defeat of a champion, but the birth of a new era of cooperation and understanding. As the formal ceremonies began, Jake watched his friend Pete shake hands with beings from dozens of different worlds. Each species wanted to learn about rock, paper, scissors, and to teach Pete about their own traditional games. You know what the best part is? Amy said as they watched. What? Jake replied. Pete did exactly what he set out to do. He proved that humans belong in this galaxy not because we're the strongest or the smartest, but because we think differently. We approach problems from angles nobody else considers. Rick was already making plans. We need to get word back to Earth immediately. The president is going to want to know that one of our anthropologists just became the galaxy's first director. of cultural exchange by winning a children's game? Lisa looked up from her device. Actually, the news is already spreading faster than we could transmit it. Every species here is sending messages home about what happened today. What are they saying? Jake asked. That a small, weak species called humans just taught the galaxy's greatest warrior that there are better ways to solve problems than fighting. On the arena floor, Pete was now surrounded by a group of young aliens from various species, all trying to learn the finer points of rock, paper, scissors strategy. Zekdara stood nearby, answering questions about Vorthak military tactics and how they related to game theory. You know, Jake said to his team, when we left Earth 6 months ago, our mission was to observe and learn about other species. And now? Amy asked. Jake smiled as he watched Pete demonstrate the proper scissors technique to a group of fascinated alien children. Now it looks like we're the ones doing the teaching. The celebration continued long into the station's night cycle, with beings from across the galaxy learning to play human games while teaching humans about their own cultures. And at the center of it all, a small professor from Earth and a massive warrior from the Vorthak Empire planned the future of galactic cooperation, one game at a time. When the history of human expansion into the galaxy was written, scholars would mark this day as the moment when humanity truly found its place among the stars. Not as conquerors or supplicants, but as friends, teachers, and bridge builders between civilizations. All because one man had the courage to challenge the impossible, with nothing more than rock, paper, and scissors.